The day I met Jack Anderson, I was having the worst morning of my career. My coffee had spilled all over my white blouse, my laptop crashed with my half-finished restaurant review, and my editor was breathing down my neck about deadlines. Being a food critic for the Boston Globe wasn't always glamorous, but it usually wasn't this chaotic. I was supposed to be reviewing an upscale French restaurant in Back Bay, but my reservation had been mysteriously cancelled. That's how I ended up standing in front of a food truck on a chilly October morning, my stomach growling and my patience wearing thin. Anderson's Kitchen, the sign read in simple, elegant lettering. The line was surprisingly long for a Wednesday morning, which piqued my professional interest. When I finally reached the window, I came face to face with him. Jack Anderson looked nothing like what I expected from a food truck chef. His eyes were tired but kind, and there was something about his presence that commanded attention without trying. "What's good?" I asked, trying to maintain my professional detachment. He smiled, and for a moment, I forgot about my ruined blouse and crashed laptop. "Everything," he said with a confidence that should have been arrogant but somehow wasn't. "That's quite a claim," I replied, raising an eyebrow. "Try the short rib grilled cheese. If it's not the best you've ever had, it's on the house." I accepted his challenge, though I didn't tell him who I was. Food critics never reveal themselves, that's rule number 1. The sandwich, when it arrived, looked deceptively simple. But the first bite stopped me in my tracks. The meat was perfectly tender, the cheese was a complex blend that melted just right, and there was a subtle hint of something I couldn't quite place. "Truffle honey," he said, noticing my expression. "Family recipe." I nodded, trying not to show how impressed I was. This wasn't food truck food, this was fine dining disguised as street food. I came back the next day, telling myself it was for research. And the day after that. Each time, I tried something new, and each time, I was amazed. By the third visit, he knew my order before I reached the window. "You must really like the food," he said, handing me a cup of perfectly brewed coffee I hadn't ordered. "I'm still deciding," I replied, fighting a smile. "On what?" "Whether it lives up to your claim of everything being good." He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "And what's the verdict?" I took a sip of the coffee, it was exactly how I liked it. "The jury's still out." That's when I noticed the small help wanted sign in the corner of the window. "You're hiring?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking slightly embarrassed. "Business is picking up. I could use an extra hand during the lunch rush." Before I knew what I was doing, I heard myself say, "I could help." The words surprised both of us. "You want to work in a food truck?" I should have said no. I should have maintained my professional distance. Instead, I found myself nodding. "Part-time," I clarified quickly. "I have another job, but I'm curious." He studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You start tomorrow. 10 a.m. That's how Rachel Chen, award-winning food critic, ended up working part-time in a food truck. My mother would have been horrified. The daughter she'd sent to Yale was now serving sandwiches on the street. But there was something about Jack that made me want to know more. The way he treated every customer like they were dining at a 5-star restaurant. The way he remembered everyone's names and their usual orders. The way his eyes lit up when someone tried his food for the first time. Working beside him, I learned his story piece by piece. He'd gone to culinary school, worked in some of the best restaurants in the city. But he never mentioned his family, and I learned not to ask. Some wounds, I could tell, were still too fresh. Weeks turned into months, and the food truck thrived. I kept writing my reviews for the Globe, careful to never mention Anderson's kitchen. It would have been a conflict of interest, I told myself. But the truth was, I wanted to keep this place to myself. Keep him to myself. One night, after a particularly busy day, we sat on the curb sharing a plate of his latest creation. "Why a food truck?" I finally asked. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "Sometimes," he said finally, "when you lose everything, you have to start somewhere new." "What did you lose?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw all the pain he usually kept hidden. "My wife left me 2 years ago," he said softly. "My family cut me off completely. No explanation, no warning. Just silence." I wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, but I held back. "This truck," he continued, "it was all I could afford after everything. But it was mine. Something they couldn't take away." The way he said it broke my heart. That night, I went home and wrote a different kind of story. Not a review, but a piece about resilience. About starting over. About finding beauty in unexpected places. I never published it. Instead, I helped him write a business plan. My years of reviewing restaurants had taught me what worked and what didn't. I knew the right people, the right locations. Together, we started looking for a space to open a real restaurant. The day we found the perfect location, an old brownstone with high ceilings and huge windows, I finally told him the truth. "I'm a food critic for the Boston Globe." He stared at me for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "I know." "You, what?" "I recognized you the first day you came to the truck. Your review of Le Petit Bistro was brutal but fair." I felt my face grow hot. "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged, still smil. I wanted you to keep coming back." That's when I kissed him. Standing in what would become our restaurant, surrounded by dust and potential, I kissed him. And he kissed me back. The restaurant opening was a whirlwind of permits, renovations, and late nights. We named it Second Chances, though Jack insisted on keeping the food truck running too. "Never forget where you started," he said. I wrote my resignation letter to the Globe the day before opening night. My editor wasn't surprised. "About time," she said, smiling. "Just promise me one thing, no favorable reviews for your boyfriend's place." The opening night was magical. The space was packed, the food was perfect, and Jack was in his element. Watching him work in his new kitchen, confident and happy, I knew I'd made the right choice. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 3 months after we opened, Jack's past came walking through our door. I recognized his parents from the photos he kept hidden in his desk. Robert and Diana Anderson, Boston's elite. They looked exactly like their society page pictures. Jack was in the kitchen when they arrived. I watched from the host stand as they surveyed the restaurant, their expressions a mix of surprise and something else. Pride, maybe. Or regret. When Jack emerged from the kitchen, he froze. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "Son," Robert said, his voice carrying across the quiet dining room. "We need to talk." I moved to Jack's side, taking his hand. He squeezed it tightly, and I felt him trembling. "Whatever you have to say," he said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands, "you can say it here." Diana glanced around at the other diners, clearly uncomfortable. "Perhaps somewhere more private," she suggested. But Jack stood his ground. "No," he said firmly. "I built this place in public. Whatever you have to say, say it here." Robert cleared his throat. "It's about Sarah," he said. "And your cousin David." I felt Jack stiffen beside me. "And about your daughter." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Daughter?" I looked at Jack, but his face had gone completely white. "What daughter?" he whispered. And that's when everything we'd built together started to crack. Not because of the revelation, we were stronger than that. But because of the lies that had been buried for so long. Lies that were about to change everything we thought we knew. Diana pulled out her phone, her hands shaking slightly. "Her name is Lily," she said softly. "She's 20 years old. She's in art school in New York. And she's yours." I watched Jack's world shatter for the second time. The phone Diana held showed a young woman with Jack's eyes and Sarah's smile. 20 years old. A daughter he never knew existed. "How long?" Jack's voice was barely a whisper. "How long have you known?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Since the beginning," he admitted. "Sarah was already pregnant when she left you. She and David." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. I felt sick to my stomach. Not just for Jack, but for this girl, Lily, who had lived her whole life not knowing her real father. "Get out," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. "But we need to explain," Diana protested. "You've had 20 years to explain," I replied, my voice cold. "You can wait one more day." To my surprise, they left. Robert placed a business card on the nearest table before they walked out. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I handled the remaining customers while Jack disappeared into his office. When I finally closed up and went to find him, he was sitting in the dark, staring at his phone. "I found her Instagram," he said without looking up. "She's an artist. She paints beautiful things." I sat beside him, looking at the screen. Lily Anderson, she had their name, was indeed talented. Her page was full of vibrant paintings and sketches. She looked happy in her photos, surrounded by friends, living a life in New York. A life that should have included Jack. "What are you going to do?" I asked softly. He looked at me then, his eyes full of uncertainty. "What if she hates me? What if she thinks I abandoned her?" I took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Then you tell her the truth. That you never knew. That you would have been there if you had." He nodded slowly, then pulled up Instagram's message screen. Together, we crafted a simple, honest message. "Dear Lily, my name is Jack Anderson. I recently learned that I'm your biological father. I want you to know that I had no idea about your existence until today. I'm not reaching out to disrupt your life, but if you ever want to know the truth, or if you have questions, I'm here. Take all the time you need." He stared at the send button for a long time before pressing it. The waiting was the hardest part. Days passed with no response. Jack threw himself into work, creating new dishes with an intensity I'd never seen before. I watched him carefully, worried he might break. But he didn't. He just cooked and waited and hoped. A week later, the response came. We were in bed when his phone buzzed. The message was short, but it made both of us cry. I always wondered why my dad, David, never looked me in the eye. Now I know. "Can we talk?" The next morning, they had their first video call. I gave Jack privacy, but I could hear his voice breaking as he told her everything. About meeting Sarah in culinary school. About their marriage. About the divorce and the family's betrayal. About not knowing she existed. When he emerged from his office, his eyes were red, but there was hope in them. "She wants to meet," he said. "She's coming to Boston next weekend." The week that followed was a mix of anxiety and preparation. Jack stress cooked enough food to feed an army. I helped him channel his nervous energy into planning the perfect menu for when she visited. But mostly, I just held him when the weight of it all became too much. The morning Lily was due to arrive, I found him in the restaurant kitchen at 4 a.m. "I'm making her favorite," he said when I walked in. "How do you know her favorite?" "She mentioned loving mac and cheese in one of her Instagram posts. So I'm making 5 different versions." I couldn't help but smile. This was the man I loved, putting his whole heart into everything he did. Even if it meant making 5 different types of mac and cheese before sunrise. Lily arrived at noon. She had Jack's eyes, but her movements were all her own, confident, artistic, free. She stood in the doorway of Second Chances for a moment, taking everything in. Then her eyes found Jack, and time seemed to stop. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. They stood there, father and daughter, 20 years of absence between them. Then Lily took a step forward, and another, and suddenly they were hugging. I watched through tears as 2 pieces of a broken puzzle finally found each other. When they pulled apart, both wiping their eyes, Lily turned to me. "You must be Rachel," she said with a smile. "Jack told me about you. All good things, I hope." She laughed, and it was Jack's laugh. "He said you saved him." With a grilled cheese sandwich. We spent the afternoon talking. Lily told us about her art, her studies at NYU, her dreams of opening her own gallery. She asked questions about Jack's life, about how we met, about the restaurant. She ate all 5 versions of mac and cheese, declaring the truffle one her favorite. Just like her father, she had excellent taste. But there were harder questions too. "Did you ever suspect?" she asked Jack. "About me?" He shook his head. "If I had known." "I know," she said quickly. "I believe you." She told us about growing up with David and Sarah. About always feeling like something was missing. About the way the family would go quiet whenever her parentage came up. "I found some old photos once," she said. "Of you and Mom. You looked happy." "We were," Jack said softly. "Until we weren't." Lily nodded, understanding in her eyes. "David was never really a father," she admitted. "He was there, but not there, you know? And Mom, she gets this look sometimes. Like she's carrying something heavy." Now I know what it was. The truth hung between us, heavy but necessary. As the day drew to a close, Lily stood to leave. She had a train to catch back to New York. But before she left, she turned to Jack. "I have an art show next month," she said. "At my school. Would you both come?" Jack's face lit up like a sunrise. "We wouldn't miss it," I said, squeezing his hand. After she left, Jack and I sat in the empty restaurant. "She's amazing," I said. "She is," he agreed. "And she doesn't hate me." "Of course she doesn't hate you. You're her father. The only question is, what happens now?" Jack was quiet for a moment. "Now," he said finally, "we build something new. Something honest." I leaned my head on his shoulder, thinking about family and truth and second chances. About how sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments. About how love can bridge even the widest gaps. But I also thought about Sarah and David and the Andersons. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The truth was out, but its ripples were just beginning to spread. And somewhere in Boston, a powerful family was probably already planning their next move. But for now, in this moment, we had hope. We had each other. And we had Lily. Sometimes, I realized, that's enough to start with. That night, as we lay in bed, Jack turned to me. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For being here. For helping me be strong enough for this." I kissed him softly. "Always," I promised. And I meant it. Because sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it's about standing beside someone as they face their past. About helping them build a future from the pieces of what was broken. About making 5 different kinds of mac and cheese at 4 a.m. Just because you want someone to feel loved. The art show invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning. Simple, elegant, with Lily's name in flowing script. But it wasn't just the invitation that caught my attention. It was the small note tucked inside. "They know I'm coming to the show," Lily had written. "Sarah and David. And probably the whole family." I found Jack in the kitchen, already preparing for the lunch rush. His hand stilled when I showed him the note. "We knew this would happen eventually," I said softly. He nodded, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "I won't let them ruin this for her," he said firmly. "It's her moment." We booked our train tickets to New York that afternoon. The week leading up to the show was a whirlwind of preparation. Jack insisted on catering some small bites for the event. "Art galleries always have terrible food," he explained. "Not my daughter's show." I watched him work, loving how he said "my daughter" with such pride now. The night before we left, I found him staring at old photos. Pictures of him and Sarah in happier times. "I keep trying to see it," he said. Some sign that she was pregnant. Some hint that everything was about to fall apart. I sat beside him, taking his hand. "You couldn't have known." They made sure of that. The train ride to New York was quiet. Jack alternated between checking his phone for messages from Lily and staring out the window. I could feel his anxiety building with each mile. When we arrived at the gallery, my breath caught. Lily's work was stunning. Large, emotional pieces that seemed to pulse with life. But it was one painting in particular that stopped us both cold. A man standing at a food truck window, sunlight catching his profile. It was Jack. She'd painted him from a photo she'd found online, from when the Globe had done a piece on up-and-coming food entrepreneurs. "She captured you perfectly," I whispered, squeezing his hand. Before he could respond, we heard her voice. "You came." Lily rushed over, hugging us both. She looked beautiful in a simple black dress, her eyes bright with excitement. "Of course we came," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "We wouldn't miss it." That's when I saw them. Sarah and David, standing across the gallery. Sarah looked older than her photos, lines of worry etched around her eyes. David couldn't seem to look in our direction. The tension in the room was palpable. Other guests seemed to sense it, clustering in small groups, whispering. Lily noticed too. "Just ignore them," she said firmly. "This is my night. These are my paintings. And you're my father." Jack hugged her again, and I saw Sarah flinch at the sight. The evening progressed like a carefully choreographed dance. Different groups circulating the gallery, never quite intersecting. Until Sarah finally broke the pattern. She approached us while Lily was speaking with some professors. Jack, she said softly. Rachel. I felt Jack stiffen beside me. Your food, she continued, gesturing to the appetizer table. It's wonderful. As always. Thank you, Jack replied, his voice carefully neutral. But I didn't make it for you. Sarah's face fell slightly. No, I suppose you didn't. She glanced at Lily across the room. She's talented, isn't she? Like you were. Before. Before what, Sarah? Jack's voice was quiet but intense. Before you took her from me? Before you let me believe I'd lost everything? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple, I interrupted. You made a choice. Every day for 20 years, you made the same choice. Sarah looked at me then, really looked at me. You don't understand, she began. You're right, I said. I don't understand how anyone could do that to someone they claimed to love. To their own child. Before she could respond, Lily returned. The temperature in our little circle seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom, Lily said, her voice cool. I see you've met my father. Again. The emphasis on that last word made Sarah wince. Lily, honey. Don't, Lily cut her off. Not tonight. This is my show. My work. My truth. She gestured to the paintings around us. Look at them, Mom. Really look. They're all about searching. About missing pieces. About the holes in my life that never made sense until now. Sarah was crying openly now. David appeared at her side, trying to lead her away. But Lily wasn't finished. You know what the worst part is? Her voice was steady. Pied the tears in her eyes. I could have had both of you. We could have found a way. But you chose lies instead. The gallery had gone quiet. Everyone was watching our little drama unfold. But Lily held her head high. I'd like you to leave now, she said firmly. Both of you. Sarah reached for her, but Lily stepped back. Into Jack's protective embrace. David finally spoke. You can't erase 20 years, he said. We raised you. No, Lily replied. You housed me. You fed me. But you never really raised me. Because that would have required honesty. Love. Truth. They left. Not just Sarah and David, but the entire Anderson contingent that had been hovering at the edges of the gallery. Once they were gone, Lily collapsed into a chair. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to cause a scene. Jack knelt beside her. You have nothing to be sorry for. You told your truth. That's never wrong. The rest of the evening was actually lovely. Without the weight of the Andersons' presence, Lily bloomed. She sold several paintings. Got offers for future shows. Made plans with classmates for celebrations. And through it all, she kept coming back to us. To Jack. To me. To the family we were becoming. Later that night, in our hotel room, Jack was quiet. What are you thinking? I asked. That I'm proud of her, he said. So proud it hurts. But. He sighed. But I'm worried about what comes next. The Andersons don't like losing. They won't let this go easily. He was right, of course. The Andersons were powerful. Used to getting their way. And we had just very publicly challenged their carefully constructed narrative. But looking at Jack, seeing the peace in his eyes despite his worry, I knew we'd face whatever came next together. Because that's what family does. Real family. The kind built on truth and love and choice. Not obligation and lies. As if reading my thoughts, Jack pulled me close. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything." I kissed him softly. "Always," I replied. Because sometimes that's all you need to say. When love is real. When family is chosen. When truth finally wins. The next morning, Lily joined us for breakfast. She looked tired but happy. "I have something to tell you both," she said. And I knew, somehow, that our story was far from over. That this was just the beginning of something new. Something real. Something true. "I'm transferring to Boston University," Lily announced over her blueberry pancakes. Jack's fork clattered against his plate. "Are you sure?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Because of us?" Lily smiled, reaching for his hand. "Partly," she admitted. "But also because BU has an amazing fine arts program. And because I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending." I watched them together, this father and daughter finding their way back to each other. "What about your scholarship?" I asked. Ed gently. That's when Lily's smile faltered slightly. "Grandfather's already called the school," she said. "He's pulling his donation. And my funding." Jack's face darkened. "I'll pay for it," he said immediately. "Every penny. We'll figure it out." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Jack interrupted. "I'm your father. Let me be your father." I reached for my phone, already pulling up the restaurant's financials. We've been doing well, very well. Between the restaurant and the food truck, we could make it work. "We'll help you find an apartment too," I added. "Near campus. Or you could stay with us. Whatever you want." Lily looked between us, her expression soft. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Jack said firmly. "You're a gift. One I thought I'd lost forever." That's when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Tell Jack to check his email." I showed it to Jack, who pulled out his phone. His face went pale as he read. "What is it?" I asked. "Uncle Henry," he said. "He's offering a deal." Lily stiffened. "What kind of deal?" Jack read the email aloud. "If you agree to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of Lily's birth and childhood, the family will reinstate her scholarship. Plus living expenses. And in return, you both stay away from family events. Keep your distance. Maintain the story as it's always been." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Lily laughed. A sharp, bitter sound that reminded me so much of Jack. "They still don't get it, do they?" She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't want their money. I don't want their lies. I want my father. I want the truth." Jack deleted the email without responding. We spent the rest of the day helping Lily plan her move to Boston. Looking at apartments near campus. Discussing class schedules. Planning where to put her easel in our spare room until she found her own place. But that night, after Lily had gone back to her hotel, Jack was restless. "They'll try again," he said. "The Andersons always do." I knew he was right. Money and power were all they understood. And they had both in abundance. But they didn't have what we had. Truth. Love. Family. The real kind. 2 weeks later, Lily moved to Boston. She took the spare room despite our offers to help her find an apartment. "I've missed enough time with you both," she said simply. Her art supplies slowly took over the apartment. Canvases leaned against walls. Paintbrushes appeared in coffee mugs. The smell of oil paints mixed with the scents from Jack's test kitchen. It was perfect. She started classes at BU, throwing herself into her studies. And every evening, she'd come to the restaurant. Sometimes to work on sketches at the bar. Sometimes to help in the kitchen. Always to be with us. One night, she brought home a boy. Marku. A fellow art student. Jack tried not to hover too obviously. I caught him watching them from the kitchen, pretending to inventory supplies. "She's 20, I reminded him gently. "And she can take care of herself." "I know," he sighed. "I just want to make up for lost time?" He nodded. "You can't get those years back," I said. "But you can be here now. That's what matters." The weeks turned into months. Lily's art began appearing on the restaurant walls. Customers loved it. Several pieces sold. She used the money to buy her own art supplies, refusing to let us help. "I need to do this myself," she insisted. Just like her father. Sarah tried calling once. Left a long voicemail about missing Lily. About wanting to explain. Lily listened to it once, then deleted it. "Maybe someday," she said. "But not now. Now I need to figure out who I am." Without their version of my story. David never called. But we saw him once, standing across the street from the restaurant. Just watching. He left when Lily noticed him. The Andersons made one final attempt at control. They threatened to sue for custody retroactively. To claim Jack had abandoned Lily. Their lawyers sent threatening letters. But Lily had kept everything. Every message. Every email. Every piece of evidence showing she'd never known Jack was her father. That they had hidden the truth. The lawsuit threat disappeared as quickly as it had come. Life settled into a new normal. Family dinners every Sunday. Lily and Jack cooking together, experimenting with recipes. Me watching them, my heart full. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Lily made an announcement. "I've been offered a show," she said. "A real one. At the Gardner Museum." We celebrated with champagne. Toasted her success. Her courage. Her truth. The show opening was everything the gallery show should have been. Filled with love and support. No tension. No lies. Just family. Real family. Sarah and David didn't come. Neither did the Andersons. But Marcus was there. And Jack's old friend Tommy. And my parents, who had embraced Lily as their own. And us. Her real family. The one she chose. The one that chose her back. Later that night, after the guests had gone home, we stood together looking at her centerpiece. A massive canvas showing 3 figures at a food truck. A man cooking. A woman watching. A young girl finding her way home. "It's called Second Chances," Lily said softly. "Like the restaurant." Jack hugged her close, tears in his eyes. I joined them, this little family we'd built from broken pieces. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that sometimes the best families aren't the ones we're born into. They're the ones we build. One truth at a time. One day at a time. one love at a time. End.